All right, today we're going to dive into something called mental maintenance. It's this really practical framework from Bishop Vanessa Byrd, and it's all about clearing out that mental clutter so you can start thinking clearly, planning better, and just, living with more confidence.
So let me ask you something. Does your mind ever just feel full? Overloaded? Like you're kind of losing your grip on things? Well, if that sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. Bishop Byrd points to this exact feeling, being mentally, emotionally, even spiritually overloaded as a huge red flag that something's got to change.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, Bishop Byrd uses this absolutely brilliant analogy. She says, hey, think of your mind like a computer. It's super powerful for sure, but it's got its limits.
And what happens when you have way too many tabs open at once? We've all been there, right? All those worries, things you haven't dealt with, conversations you're replaying, anxieties. Suddenly, the whole system just starts to lag. It gets glitchy, it misfires. And if you're not careful, it can completely crash. And usually, it happens at the worst possible time.
So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the overloaded mind itself. Then we'll talk about your mind's warning lights. After that, we'll get into the mind dump method. Then we'll touch on something she calls the truth museum. And finally, how you can actually take all this for a test drive.
Okay, first things first. Let's really dig into the problem. What is actually happening when our mental system gets totally clogged up? Because this isn't just about feeling busy. No, this is a full-on system slowdown that impacts pretty much everything. And this quote from Bishop Byrd, it just hits the nail on the head. A crowded mind literally sabotages your ability to function. I mean, think about it, right? How can you hear good advice or plan for your future or even just move forward with any kind of confidence when your head is just full of noise? And I'm guessing the symptoms here probably sound pretty familiar. You're mentally cluttered, emotionally exhausted, you find yourself getting spiritually distracted from the things that actually matter, you just feel stuck, replaying the same old thoughts over and over, and you just can't seem to break the cycle.
So, the big question is, how do you even know when it's time for some maintenance? Well, the good news is our minds actually have this built in diagnostic system. We just have to learn how to read the signals.
And here's the next big analogy she uses, and it's so helpful. Think about your emotional triggers like the dashboard lights in your car, right? When that check engine light comes on, you know something needs your attention. It's not just a friendly suggestion, it's a signal that something needs to be looked at, like right now.
And this quote really reframes the whole idea of a trigger, doesn't it? They're not just these annoying things that happen to us. No, they're diagnostic tools. They're telling us that something under the hood needs our attention. And ignoring them, well, that's basically like putting a piece of black tape over your check engine light and hoping for the best.
And listen, these warning lights, they can pop up in all kinds of ways. Maybe for you, it's that sudden flash of irritation for no good reason. Or maybe it's that feeling of being completely overwhelmed, just carrying way too much. It could be mental fatigue, that constant emotional strain, or just getting stuck in a loop, replaying the same things again and again. All of these, they're signals. They're telling you it's time for maintenance.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problem. Let's get to the solution. Bishop Byrd gives us this super practical, really actionable method to get that clarity back, and she calls it the mind dump. So what exactly is a mind dump? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's the intentional act of emptying everything out of your head and putting it somewhere else, like on a piece of paper or in the Notes app on your phone. It can be anything from, I am so worried about this deadline, to, ugh, I'm still mad about what Sarah said yesterday. The whole point is to stop carrying all that weight around in your head so you can actually look at it, process it, and deal with it.
And the method is beautifully simple. It's just 3 steps. Step 1 is recognize. Just notice what's actually going on in your mind. What thoughts and feelings are weighing you down? Just name them. Step 2 is release. This is where you intentionally transfer that weight. You write it down, you say it out loud, you get it out. And finally, step 3 is redirect. You consciously turn your mind towards something true, something productive.
And I love this way of thinking about that release step. Bishop Byrd says your head is not a suitcase. It was never designed to just carry around a bunch of junk. So the mind dump, that's the process of finally unpacking it all. The worries, the old hurts, the stress, and just putting it down. Okay, but here's a really crucial part of this whole thing. Just knowing this method, that's not enough. There's this massive gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. And that gap can be pretty dangerous.
I mean, this is such a common trap, right?
We become collectors of good ideas, of powerful quotes. We fill our heads with them. But if we never, ever apply them, we just stay mentally exhausted. We end up being hearers, but not doers. And Bishop Byrd has a fantastic name for this state of passive learning. She calls it the Truth Museum. Picture it, a mind filled with all these beautiful exhibits of truth. Sermons you've heard, books you've read, all kinds of wise advice. But there's no movement. You can walk around and admire all the concepts, but you leave completely unchanged because nothing ever gets put into practice. So it really comes down to a choice. You can be a hearer, the person who stays in the museum, just storing facts and admiring concepts, but never really changing. Or you can be a doer, the person who actually takes these ideas for a test drive, applies the principles, and starts to experience some real transformation.
So let's talk about that test drive. How do we actually get out of the museum of theory and onto the streets of real, everyday practice? Because that is where the change really happens. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The whole point of mental maintenance isn't to have this perfectly decorated mind, full of cool ideas. It's to have a well-directed life, one that's guided by principles that actually hold up when you're under pressure. And that's where the test drive really happens. It's not in some quiet, peaceful room. It's in the middle of a chaotic day at work. It's when you're tempted to react in that same old way. It's when somebody says something that offends you. That's when you practice the mind dump. That's when you see if the repairs you've made are actually going to hold. And this leads to a pretty powerful reality check. See, it can be really easy to chalk up every single problem to some kind of external attack. But Bishop Byrd challenges us to ask a different question. Is this really an attack, or is it just an untrained habit? A lot of the time, it's not a demon, it's a decision. It's less about spiritual warfare and more about our own mental work ethic. It's not always an enemy. Sometimes it's just an issue of discipline. Look, this whole framework, it isn't just a bunch of information. It's really an invitation to transform. It's about recognizing the clutter in your own mind, knowing the steps to clear it out, and then finding the courage to actually build some new patterns. So when you boil it all down, there's really only one question left. What old pattern are you going to break today?